part 2 of the Legacy of Kain marathon train. Rolling right on time, not late at all. Blood Omen just finished up. Time to hit Soul Reaver. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know, Soul Reaver's late. I apologize. I talked about it in a few videos before this. I mean, it's not like I haven't done a video since Blood Omen, but from Star Wars month to doing Subnautica and doing a few trips, it's just, I've given you all the reasons and excuses as to why this is late. But it's here now, and that's all that matters. So let's just jump right into Soul Reaver. Released in November of 1999, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver was thrown to the masses as a sequel to the surprise hit that was Legacy of Kain Blood Omen. Remember Legacy of Kain Blood Omen? I just reviewed it a few weeks back. Remember playing as Kain on a path for vengeance and killing those tied to the Pillars of Nosgoth? Cool. Let me set up Soul Reaver for you then. The bad ending was the canon ending. Kain has been ruling for centuries and has created an army of vampire offspring to spread the curse he once set out to cure. The Pillars of Nosgoth have been destroyed and left in ruin in the world, while Nightmare Hellscape is more or less ruled by Kain. Every so often, Kain will go away for a while and emerge with a new evolution to the vampiric race that he will then pass on to his offspring, making them more powerful. You play as Raziel, one of Kain's most powerful lieutenants, and you're a sassy rebel who grew wings on his own and surpassed his master, Kain, in evolution. Kain's a jealous bitch, though, and rewards you by ripping your wings off and tossing you into a lake where Raziel meets his untimely demise until a Lovecraftian tentacle creature lifts your cold dead husk back to life to make you the Soul Reaver. A creature meant to bring balance back to the world. After having tossed you into the lake, thousands of years have passed, humanity is all but dead, the natural wheel of life has completely ceased to turn, and the world is on the brink of collapse. As Raziel, you'll be going back and forth between the physical realm and the spectral realm, as you're technically already dead, on a mission to destroy Kain and your once brothers to bring the world back from the brink of total annihilation and to set free the souls of the vampires that are long overdue to be dead already. Neat. Well, welcome to Soul Reaver. This game is weird. Not weird bad, just weird. Legacy of Kain Blood Omen was pretty straightforward affair as far as top-down action RPGs go. The story was also a straightforward tale of vengeance, but the voice acting in that game and the gothic world sold it and made it an absolute pleasure to play through. Not that the gameplay was bad or anything, but the world-building elements and voice acting really lifted the game above what it would have been without any of it. But if Blood Omen was the young kid in the Legacy of Kain saga, Soul Reaver is the experimental 20-something-year-old, where maybe you take something you maybe shouldn't have, and shit gets a little trippy. Are the clouds talking, man? And is nature alive? And what if our souls are nothing but commodities for other undead, man? And is that statue over there looking at me, bro? Actually, yes. What? Is it my shirt? My mom got me this shirt. You got something wrong with it? You got something to say about it? The fuck is wrong? What's wrong with it? What do you mean? Soul Reaver certainly seems like a weird concept after Blood Omen. To go from being an all-around badass vampire, killing all who stand in his way on a path of vengeance, a cure, and eventually just his glory, to then step into the boots of a once lieutenant of Kain turned undead wraith whose mission is to free the souls and murder those he once called his brothers, all while traversing the physical and spectral realm just to bring balance back to the world? It seems like a really weird departure. And if you thought the same, you might be right. If some rumors are to be believed, Soul Reaver wasn't always supposed to be a game in the Legacy of Kain franchise, but its own game based on twisted biblical lore. However, details are relatively sparse and hard to come by. But don't worry, not only am I a judge, but I am also a detective. See here, Raziel's the name of an archangel, not just the name of our main character in this ding-dang-darn game called Soul Reaver. Yes, and during gameplay, Raziel obtains the power to phase through the gated areas, taking a pose similar to that of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ up on the cross. Moreover, during the game, you are regarded multiple times as the Chosen One, or as the Messiah. How interesting.
In conclusion, Raziel is an interpretation of Jesus, while Kain is an interpretation of Judas. Raziel, being Jesus, was a bad as warrior. Him, he fights him like Jesus would have fought him in the Bible. And Raziel, therefore, is Jesus. And just like the Bible, he kills Judas.
While Soul Reaver might be weird though, it still maintains that gothic, dreary horror mood that Blood Omen did and established so well. However, now that over 1,000 years have passed since last we saw Nosgoth, the gothic and unique architecture is broken down and destroyed. The world itself is being ripped apart, and the visuals do a great job representing that. There's an air of desperation hanging over Nosgoth throughout the game. And take it from a man who knows desperation. And take it from a man who's known desperation all of his life. Soul Reaver, even today, is still a hell of a looker though. A classic example of an art style maintaining an appealing aesthetic despite the technology and hardware being long obsolete. Everything is distinct with sharp edges and twists and turns, colors pop, and Raziel himself has a badass design with broken wings and a missing jaw and a waistline to die for. Damn, girl, you gotta let me know on that. What's that diet, girl? You got a good diet. Let me know. Damn, girl. And just like Blood Omen before it, the voice acting in Soul Reaver is stellar. Michael Bell steps up to the plate to voice our main character Raziel, and his delivery is nothing short of incredible. It's weighty and almost Shakespearean in the way he speaks. Everything he says seems filled with purpose and curiosity at this world that he once knew, but is no longer a part of. And of course, Simon Templeman returns to reprise his role as Kain, and is just as angry and has the same gravitas that he did the first time around. Which is saying something given the limited animations.
And we are a step closer to our destinies.
The story itself is, much like Blood Omen, pretty straightforward too. It's essentially the same setup. You were betrayed, then killed, then resurrected to bring vengeance on those who killed you. Every time you kill someone, you learn a little about the story and the world around you and gain a sweet new power along the way. If Blood Omen was the top-down Zelda-style game with dungeons and powers, Soul Reaver is that 3D transition to that very same formula. Listen, lots of people have really fond memories of Soul Reaver, including myself. But usually it's about the story and the legacy of the series as a whole, and Soul Reaver is the first time that we get introduced to the character of Raziel. And I think a lot of the fondness of Soul Reaver is because of the story and characters. Because when we get to the brass tacks, Soul Reaver's gameplay is uninspired? Really? Is it every time I say something you don't like, is this what's gonna happen? Is this gonna be how things are forever between us? Listen, Tomato Man, I'm sure you adore this game. I'm not saying it's bad. Just, like, make a salad or something instead of wasting that fruit. Be useful. Don't waste your life or food. Soul Reaver is still fun to play and decidedly way less difficult than young Mathas remembers. But it's so by the books and falls into the same gameplay loop nearly every game of this era had fallen into, and it's really simple to understand. You explore the world, find a dungeon-like area, fight a few monsters, do a bit of platforming, solve a bunch of puzzles, and then fight a boss to gain a new power that will, in turn, allow you to access the next dungeon and maybe some secrets that you had missed along the way. It's simple and is still used today by a lot of games, and for good reason. It works. It just sticks out a bit nowadays. Luckily, Soul Reaver isn't without some innovation though, specifically in the platforming segments. I had mentioned before that Raziel is able to traverse both physical and spectral planes at will. And this comes into play often, and it's probably the defining mechanic of the game, and is definitely for me the most memorable one. From the physical realm, you can, at will, twist the world around you and place yourself into the spectral realm. And in the spectral realm, there are portals that you can use to return to the physical realm as long as you're at full health. This mechanic is pretty generously used throughout the game for some fun platforming segments because the spectral realm is not quite the same as the physical realm. Architecture is warped and twisted in the land of spirits. Pillars and walls jut out unnaturally, which then allows you as the player to access areas in the room you couldn't while you were in the land of the living. Also in the spectral realm, normal things like water, which would normally kill you in the physical realm, pose no threats whatsoever and is treated just like the air around you, which can lead to some really fun and secret areas beneath the lakes and waters that you actually end up coming across. This twisting mechanic is used constantly throughout the game and turns a pretty standard fare action platformer into something a little more memorable. As do the block puzzles though, and not because the block puzzles are fun, but because they are goddamn everywhere. Simply put, there's way more platforming and puzzle solving in Soul Reaver than there is in actual combat. In most combat, you can actually just run past and ignore. So the meat of the game is you trying to use your brain to figure out some block puzzles and do some platforming. Problem is, the block puzzles are dead simple, usually boiling down to pushing a block into a block-sized hole where you'll hear a click, something moves, a new block now needs to be pushed into another block-sized hole so that another piece of the room changes, which gives you a new block, and rinse and repeat until you move on. And I'm just realizing saying block-sized hole is oddly sexual, but also not at all sexual. The puzzles themselves are boring and repetitive, and I mostly hated them for how simple they were. Sure, a few here and there tease your brain, but overall I don't expect anyone to be slamming their head against a wall in frustration. And while we're having you whine like a child, something I realize I'm quite good at, the last thing I want to harp on is the game's ending. I'm not going to spoil it, don't worry, and it doesn't stop the story and voice acting and world building from being top-notch. Nor the twists and revelations that happen during the story, those aren't spoiled either, and they are still really truly quite impressive, especially if you never played the game before. But the ending, good lord, it's something I would expect out of a AAA game today that planned on churning out many sequels. You don't get the closure you would expect. For me, it nearly spoiled what was a hell of a great ride from start to finish. Luckily, the games are relatively easy to access, and I'll be diving into Soul Reaver 2 to continue that story nearly instantly after this video goes live. So, if you played Soul Reaver before and remember it fondly, I'm certain all aspects that you loved hold on strong. But if it's been a long time since you've played, then just prepare yourself for a bit of a dated game and a bit of a dated gameplay loop and some mildly, though admittedly totally workable, annoying control scheme straight out of the late 90s. Still, Soul Reaver, even with all its faults, is still quite good, and I had a great time playing it.
Soul Reaver is one of those games where childhood Mathas had a really hard time with it and couldn't beat the game, but still really enjoyed Soul Reaver for what it was. An adult Mathas really enjoyed the first half to first quarter of the game, as the game did represent everything that I had fond memories of. But after that halfway mark, you realize that most of the combat can be completely ignored, and you can run past most everything. And that the rest of the game is just block puzzles and platforming. And though the platforming is very interesting with the warping of reality and going between spectral and physical realms, it wasn't enough to bring the game to an amazing level of standards. It was still a good game, but it wasn't a great game. And I think that's an important distinction to make. The story and the character and the lore that is presented here is great, especially knowing that there's still 3 games ahead of me to explore this really bizarre, almost sci-fi-esque story. But if you look at Soul Reaver as a standalone, it very much is a slightly above average game. Something I enjoyed and would probably play again in a few years, but nothing that I would be playing every year because it's just so amazing. So I, the Honorable Judge Mathas, judge Soul Reaver as guilty. Guilty of giving me false memories, man. I thought this game was way better than it was. I thought I remembered it being amazing, and in fact, it's just good. Still worth playing, especially if you love the lore of this kind of game with vampires and all that stuff. But just prepare yourself for a lot of old-timey gameplay mechanics and some frustrating controls, especially if you play on PC. I highly recommend you just avoid mouse and keyboard altogether and get like a Joy-to-Key program and use your Xbox 360 controller. It worked perfectly for me, and there's a bunch of setups out there that you can do some research on if you really want to play it on PC. I think it looks best on PC, but the PS1 one and all that stuff works perfectly well as well. So my question to you is simple. Do you have a game that you remember really fondly, but end up playing in modern day and end up
little disappointed. Not that it's bad, but just not as good as you remember. Very Soul Reaver-esque for me. I'm curious what your game is, and drop it in the comment section below. I'm looking forward to reading them. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you all for being so patient, waiting for the part 2 of the Legacy of Kain Marathon series. Soul Reaver's already been played a little bit, Soul Reaver 2 rather. I'm already on my way through playing Soul Reaver 2, so that should be the next game here on the Judge Mathas channel. I appreciate all the immense support on the channel as always, and a big shout out to all my Patrons over on the Patreon. If you want to check out the Patreon, there's some exclusive stuff you can get on the Patreon by supporting me on some tier, whether it just be some behind the scenes videos, access to the script or the video earlier than when most people get to see it, maybe exclusive access to the Discord. It's just some stuff. You feel free to go check it out. And if you don't, that's totally fine too. Just thank you guys so much for watching these videos and supporting me as I kind of go through this little Judge Mathas adventure. I hope to see you guys in the next one in a couple weeks, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.